Hello and welcome to another episode of It Came From the Page. And today we're doing my monthly wrap-up. I have not done a monthly wrap-up in a while. It's not a big surprise. It's not something I enjoy doing. It's also not something that I think most people are interested in, even though if I looked at the numbers, they're probably more consistently watching everything else. Maybe I just don't like watching them. Anyways, regardless, here they are. So if you don't know, there was a few reading events going on in November. There was the Cryptid Read-A-Thon, and there was also the Patreon Read-A-Thon that I put on Novelization November, which is just like a read-a-thon on my Patreon. And I do like a Patreon-only read-a-thon. Like I think I'm going for like every 3 months or something new. For $3, be a part of it. Links in the show notes below. But regardless, most of what I read that month were like tie-ins and novelization and a few cryptid stories. So let's just get started. This is going from worst to best. I kind of just like doing that as it kind of gives you an idea of what my overall opinions of all these books are, especially when compared to each other. So the worst book I read, by far, was Night of the Demon by Brad Carter. This is a novelization put out by Severin Films. Severin Films is mainly a Blu-ray DVD company, but recently they've started to release novelizations for various films in their back catalog. Now, Night of the Demon, the movie, is not a good movie. It's not a very good movie at all. It's not a good movie. It is a fun Bigfoot movie in which the most notable part of the movie is that Bigfoot tears off a biker's dick. Literally, that's the most notable part about that movie. It was a movie that was kind of set up to be like this like documentary series, and originally it was like filmed as like a mostly kind of serious like faux documentary about Bigfoot, and with like interviews with random people, and then they decided at the last minute to film a bunch of like gory death scenes to sneak in the middle of this more sedate movie. So this is a novelization of that film, and the novelization is not good. I mean, it's one of those things, like, I feel like this is very Richard Lehman-y in the way that, like, everyone is horny, everyone's boning all the time, which is, like, fine, but you gotta be, like, a good writer to make that interesting. And sex for sex sake is, like, not interesting to read. You know, I expect my perverts to have a little bit more substance to them. But overall, there's, like, a bunch of added stuff in here, like, quite a bit of added stuff to this story, but none of it goes anywhere. It's all kind of like false starts. There's like 3 or 4 characters that you get a POV from that aren't in the movie, and they get like the most like innocuous of deaths. Like they get taken out very quickly and randomly, and you're like, oh, okay, so their inclusion actually doesn't change the story, you know. So a good novelization adds something to an overall story, including things that maybe you didn't see, or how characters are feeling, or like what's all these like added benefits to reading a movie in novel form, is that you can kind of grow more of an attachment to these characters and have little conversations and little tidbits and things that weren't actually in the movie, but seamlessly blend in with it. This was like 2 books put together, because like one book is like what I said about this freaking this professor who sucks, like hardcore, this terrible professor going off into the woods with his students, and they all horny all the time. And then there's like a side story about this like ex-student of his who was like a lover of him, and she's like trying to track him down because she's also a cryptozoologist. That plotline goes nowhere. There's a storyline with his wife, where his wife comes and tries to find him and search for him. That storyline also goes nowhere. So, like, there's all of these storylines that are just random-ass filler, basically. And, like, the filler is just, like, more like, everyone be horny. And it's like, yeah, it's meh. It's bleh. It's bad. Next up is the Horus Heresy novel, Born of Flame. This is by Nick Kime. This is one of the last books in the Horus Heresy line. I only have 6 books left to read as of recording this from the Horus Heresy series, and I can tell you without a doubt this is the least essential of all of them. There are over 50 of these books, and of all of those, this is the least essential book in the entire series. Now, just because something isn't essential doesn't mean that it can't be a good story, but this is also a pretty boring story. This is a collection of novellas and short stories, and the two big novellas at the start and the end. The final novella is not that bad and is kind of interesting. Again, it's not important in any way, but it's kind of interesting. But the original novella is just like prairie pointless, and I don't like the message at the end of it. I'm very confused as to what it was even trying to say about some of the characters that it was, was being written about. So yeah, this one is definitely near the bottom. Next up is Star Wars: Dark Lord: The Rise of Darth Vader by James Luceno. So I read quite a few. I actually read 3 Star Wars books this month, which is quite a few given that, I think in the last, 3-4 years, I've read 0 Star Wars books. So this is a book that was released when the movie Revenge of the Sith got released. There was a prequel novel by the same author and a sequel novel by the same author. So I read both the prequel and the sequel, and then I rewatched the movie just to kind of see how they all blend together. So while you will see the prequel novel much higher on this list, this book is kind of down here, and it's not even that it's terrible. It's that James Luceno introduces all of these new characters for the story, and none of them are very interesting or memorable or have anything that feels impactful or important about them. But when he's writing pre-existing characters, that's interesting. When he's writing about Darth Vader and the formation of the Empire and all these back and forth of the inner politics of what it's like to be a galactic empire run by the Sith, that stuff is interesting and has some elements that are actually compelling to read, whereas the other stuff is just it's not terrible, but it's kind of bleh. It's kind of boring. I will say there's a really cool fight scene at the end where there's this big giant battle in Kashyyyk. That was fun, but overall, this was kind of just a meh book. I would have liked it had it been maybe just a novella about Darth Vader, because it's kind of set up where his opponent in this, who's a rogue Jedi who survived Order 66, is he makes it so that Darth Vader becomes Darth Vader and gives in fully to the Sith, and it just, I don't know, it's just bleh. But the actual stuff about Vader and Sidious and that stuff is interesting, but the rest of it is kind of meh. Next up is Old Earth by Nick Kime. Much like Born of Flame, this is a book about the Salamancer's legions in the Horus Heresy series. They are these guys who like to wield flamethrowers, and they're supposed to be the nicest of the legions. This one is higher than the other because this is actually very essential. This actually picks up and weaves in and solves a whole bunch of little plot threads that were left hanging from the Horus Heresy, and because this series then goes into another 8-ish, I guess probably 9-book series. Yeah, 9-book series, which is supposed to combine everything in this big event called the Siege of Terra, which is its own series as well. So this basically wraps up all of the disparate elements of the Horus Heresy, finalizes a bunch of plot lines, kind of gets people to where they need to be for the Siege of Terra. So this is a compelling read as well, because there is a lot of fun cosmic-y horror bits in this. It's mostly notable though because it really does tie in a lot of elements that quite frankly needed to be tied in and solved and and presented to be interesting, because so many little bits and pieces, as you would expect. This is book 47 in a series, so there are tons of disparate plot threads from a whole bunch of authors that need to be addressed and tied in and figured out to be kind of solidified before you get to the very final portion of the series. So that's one of the main purposes of this book, and it's an enjoyable read as well. Next up is a comic book. This is Aliens Genocide. I had read this book before. This is a Dark Horse Comics publishing book. It was originally published in the 1992. So this is a very early 90s alien story. It is fun and it is interesting. It's basically like, so the Dark Horse Alien series is an odd duck in terms of making a comic book series, because it starts where all of Earth is taken over by aliens. Like, literally the first story they tell is all of Earth is gone. So all of Earth is gone, and then there's a whole bunch of stories where they have to figure out how to take back Earth and blah, blah, blah. And through all of this, they discover that there is a quote-unquote home planet for the aliens. So one of the things they needed to do to take back Earth and try to solve all the problems is they needed to take this big giant queen, the Queen Mother, who ruled over all of the aliens on this planet, and they had to take her, bring her to Earth to do a bunch of nonsense in another book. But this book has people going back to the planet, and they discover that because they removed the big queen, now there's two warring elements of aliens who are kind of duking it out in this setting. So what's interesting about this book is that there actually is some good character writing. The problem is it kind of goes real quick, because there's a character who starts there as like a bigwig at a company. He's kind of like sexist. He's kind of like a crappy, shitty dude. And through the story, he learns to address some of his prejudices, learn that what he's doing is wrong, and like there's a little bit of a character arc with him. But the problem is this is a very short comic series. I think it was only like 4 issues to like when it was first released, maybe 5, but regardless, it just happens too quick. Like, you don't get enough time with that character to believe where he's at the end of the story. So that is that. Next up is Krieg by Steve Lyons, another Warhammer story. I really like this because there is this faction in Warhammer called the Death Corps of Krieg. They're like these people who are like they look like German World War I soldiers, and they basically have to go do all of the horrible, terrible, evil shit to make the Imperium continue to run and function and form. And they don't have like any personality. What they are is they are just mindless, basically what fascism would want its soldiers to be, where they only address people by their rank, and they will go in and they will just follow whatever order it is, even if it just results in them all dying. Like, they will do offensive that will get them maybe like a foot of ground and lose hundreds of thousands of people just to get that next step forward through this trench line. And it's like a horrible system that they have created, and you get to learn how their planet became what it was. And it's really interesting because their planet was just a normal planet who was like, hey, we're gonna like separate from the Imperium. There was no chaos cults. There was nothing to do with chaos that like affected the home world of the Krieg. It was just like they weren't like, it wasn't like a noble separation from the Imperium. It was like people wanted power and they wanted all these other ins and outs of like politics. But the thing is, it was just like a normal like revolution basically, and like a separation of themselves to be a independent world and an independent entity. And then there was this like offshoot of like super militarized people in their society who bomb the entire planet, make it an barren wasteland, and they come back to the Imperium, and all they do, everyone lives underground, the entire system, all they do, the only thing they export is soldiers. So their entire society is built around training soldiers in these like underground hellholes, because they can't go on the surface because it's all irradiated all to hell, to do like and export soldiers so that they can go off and die and do whatever they need. And it is so bleak, and it's like, so to me it's like the epitome of like the what Warhammer is trying to say about like how fascism is just like awful and is the worst system imaginable and just deconstructs you and makes you like a number in a system and you just mindlessly die. So like I thought it really captured the grim dark ideas of the Krieg, so I quite like that. Next up is Labyrinth of Evil by James Luceno. This is the prequel novel to Star Wars Revenge of the Sith that I was talking about earlier. I read this when I was super young. I didn't really remember a whole lot about it, but rereading it, I had a great time. So Star Wars novels are interesting because like they're kind of, especially when I'm coming from like a Warhammer novel, like I'm just talking about, like, which is all about like war is awful, horrible things happen. There is no horrible crimes happen on both sides in a war. It's in order for war to function, innocent people die, and it's a horrible thing. You shouldn't like war. Whereas Star Wars is kind of like, here's a rip-roaring adventure from space, and we're the good guys, and we'll swing our lightsabers and kill our enemies. And like, so as such, this is kind of just like a fun adventure story, but it does have a little bit more complexity to it, is because it's going right before Revenge of the Sith, which is the darkest Star Wars movie in terms of just like general plot and like things that happen in it. So it's got to set up the slow degradation of a system to become a fascist hellscape with the Emperor, the Star Wars Emperor. So it does do that in some really interesting minor little ways here and there, and it captures the characters really well. Like the way that Luceno writes Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi as they're like having their back and forth and they're talking with each other is like really entertaining and works well and kind of gets that flow going. And it also is one of the only Star Wars novels that has one of my favorite Star Wars characters, which is General Grievous. He's like a multi-arm robot guy. He's cool. Anyways, this is just a lot of fun, and one of the things and one of the strengths about Star Wars Revenge of the Sith is that story starts in media res, so you actually have a bunch of stuff that you can blend in to naturally make it so that when this story ends, you can instantly go watch the movie, because the movie starts in the middle of a huge battle. So this like leads up to that huge battle, and it just really works well and flows well to have like a prequel story to a Star Wars prequel movie. So yeah, I really like this, and it was a lot of fun. Next up is Aliens Nightmare Asylum. Now this is a novel adaptation of the Dark Horse comics that I was talking about beforehand. This is novelizing the second arc of those Dark Horse comics. So it's basically all about Billy and Wilkes, who are 100% supposed to be Hicks and Newt. When this was originally published, the comic book series was published before Alien 3 got released. So back in Nightmare Asylum, they were still Hicks and Newt, and the comics were supposed to be like telling the future adventures of them. But then you watch Alien 3 and you go, oh, that doesn't work anymore. So what they did is they went back and they changed the characters from Hicks and Newt to being Billy and Wilkes, which is very stupid. But regardless, as long as you get over the fact that it's clearly Hicks and Newt, this is a pretty enjoyable story. I did like most of this. I think there's some really interesting character writing. The main plot of this is that these guys, Billy and Wilkes, escaped Earth as it was getting overrun by the xenomorphs. So they have to go off and like they end up at this far, far-flung military base. And this military base is run by a crazy colonel who thinks that he can train the alien to then go and lead them back to Earth and then reconquer the entire system by using his trained alien soldiers. And there's a lot of really interesting little character moments here. And the only reason this isn't higher is because there are certain scenes that like just completely go against the... Because this is a fairly serious book, and there are a few scenes that like happen, and you're like, "What's this? This should not be here. This is random. Why is this here?" Like this, it just kind of like ruins the flow of the story. But for the most part, it's a pretty great Alien book. It's just there's a few scenes here and there where you're kind of like, "Ugh, I don't know if they needed that." So yeah, that's the reason why it's here. Next up, Twilight New Moon. Oh, New Moon. This might actually be... Well, it's either this one or the final book is my favorite Twilight book. This is I enjoy Twilight. It is very silly, very over the top. This one actually has a lot less problematic elements than Twilight does. I mean, except for like, the indigenous representation is not good in the Twilight films, which, goes without saying. But aside from that, well, pretty major aspect is age is a lot better. I actually think it's got some really interesting bits of character writing in it. It's got a fun plot. I don't know. I had a good time with it. I love the Volturi at the very end where they go and they find the Council of Vampires and like they're all these like very like crazy weird designs of these aliens living in Italy, and it's like I love it. Council of Vampires, I'll take it any day. Yeah, so this is just silly goodness, but I actually think there are some like fairly fun bits of character writing in this, and I had a really good time revisiting it. And if you want to see my opinions on the movie, you should pay Kelsey and be a part of her Patreon, because we do a drunk commentary series there, and we are going through the Twilight Saga, and we just did New Moon. So that is why I reread this. So what we do is we reread the books, and then we go into the drunk commentary and have a lot of fun. And so yeah, go see that. Next up, Conrad Kurz, The Night Hunter, another Warhammer book. I know, guys, it's a lot of Warhammer books, but I like this book a lot. Conrad Kurz is like the fuckboy of the Primarchs, who are like the big demigods, basically, of Warhammer. The Emperor, who's like this big freaking guy. He made a deal with demons, and now he's got like a bunch of sons. Anyways, one of them is Conrad Kurz, the Night Hunter, and he is basically the embodiment of like the worst boyfriend you've ever had, where he's all like, I'm emo and goth, and that existence is pain, and because of that, I'm gonna be the one who brings it to people. And like Conrad Kurz is really fun to read, especially because this book is written by Guy Haley, and Guy Haley like gets the satire of Warhammer pretty well, but he also has really good execution of like character interactions, and like, you know, shifting through and making a character like Conrad Kurz, who like is over the top evil, actually believable, which is like very impressive, because like every horrible thing imaginable is like what Conrad Kurz does. He's like the worst. He's the worst, and his entire legion is the worst. But they make like the ultimate villains in a story, because they're just like so ridiculously evil. And this is basically wrapping up his plot line in the Horus Heresy series, and kind of leading up to his death, because in the main series, like in Warhammer 40k, this takes place like 10,000 years before that. So in Warhammer 40k, he's dead, and this kind of goes into how he died and why and all that stuff. So really like that. And I also think that this is really good because it points out very much deliberately and intentionally that like he could have been good. He chose to be a piece of shit, because basically Conrad Kurz, in order to like justify his actions, he can see the future, so he knows it's true, it's unmenable. You can't change the future. If you see the future, it's going to happen. But this one showcases that like the way his powers works is he just sees a version of the future. He sees, even himself, he sees that had he been good to another person, they could have had a great life, and he could have made a substantive and positive change to his community, but he chose the easy route, and that was violence and being a horrible dictator, and that is why he's unhappy. But he's always like, I was made this way, I cannot change. And this goes to show like, yes bitch, you could, and you didn't. Next up is Star Wars Galaxies, The Ruins of Dantooine, a book that I did a review on, and none of you watched. So, I don't know, go watch that review if you want to know. Regardless, this is a book that people roundly consider the worst Star Wars book ever written. Like, I see that all the time. But, like, I read this and I was like, I actually, like, kind of like this better than like, most Star Wars books I've ever read. This is probably one of my favorite Star Wars books I ever read. This is a tie-in to the video game Star Wars Galaxies, but it's not really a tie-in to that. It's kind of just its own story. Yeah, I just thought the characters were really good and interesting. And there was some really interesting bits of character writing. The main plot line of like them actually visiting the ruins of Dantooine doesn't happen till like the very end of the book, but there's a lot of interesting stuff about like what it's like to be a biologist in Star Wars. And Veronica Whitney Robinson is actually a person who is a biologist in real life. So, you know, she took that and put it into a story about a biologist in Star Wars. And, like, that kind of stuff is fun. Like, there's a lot of exploration and looking at ecosystems and, like, looking at all these, like, cool creatures that exist. And it is kind of just like a relaxing book. I found this book very relaxing. I really liked the overall plot of this book. Quite a few Star Wars characters do appear in it, but I think they're melded and meshed in and brought to the forefront quite well. So yeah, I really liked The Ruins of Dantooine. Next up is Stephen King's Holly. This is a book all about Holly Gibney, which is a character that King has been kind of visiting recently. And this is a book that I think... So most Holly Gibney stories, you can just pick up and read whatevs, because it's not exactly required reading to read all of, like... Because she first appeared in the Bill Hodges trilogy, and then she was in The Outsider, and then she's in like a novella for If It Bleeds, and then this story. I have never actually read the Bill Hodges trilogy, but I've read all the other stuff that she's appeared in, and I feel like I've gotten it every time. Like, I've not been required to read up or read the other things, because King writes continuity well and writes character continuity, and make sure that you get all the important things about her character from the introductions and some of the scenes. Except for in Holly, because I do think that you need to read If It Bleeds in order to fully get the context of the story, because she describes everything that really happens in the Mr. Mercedes trilogy well enough that, I know I want to go back and read those, but you don't have to read those to get that. She does not. The Outsider and If It Bleeds are like covered like very like name droppy, but no explanation of what happened. So like you kind of have to have read at least If It Bleeds to go into this, because certain characters are like reacting to the aftermath of If It Bleeds. So it is what it is. Now, this is a book that is like kind of controversial, I guess. I guess it's controversial because he deals with COVID, and like most books don't deal with COVID. And here's the problem. That's actually, I think, a problem in current writing society. Like, there's another book that's coming up in a little bit that it takes place specifically the year before COVID, just so it doesn't have to deal with COVID. And, like, that is kind of like a gaping wound in all of current society, is that nobody wants to talk about the year everyone was in quarantine. And that, like, the COVID broke some people. And, like, there's a whole bunch of, like, complex aftermaths of the outbreaks of COVID. COVID is still happening, by the way. I am maxed up wherever I go. Now, all of that said, I don't especially think King handles COVID as well as he does other similar topics in other books. And I think it's because, like, Stephen King was rich during COVID. Because a lot of the ways that COVID comes up in this book, which comes up often, and I think it's true to Holly Gibney as a character that it comes up quite often, because, she's a person who's kind of like a hypochondriac, so she'd be hyper aware of COVID and everything like that. And, like, that's fine. I think Holly Gibney and her versions and her character rings off true. But all of the character interactions where she's, like, investigating a thing and they have to talk about COVID, or all these other places she goes to where she has to, like, kind of, like, discuss it beforehand, they feel like it's Twitter conversations and not real conversations. And that's because King is a rich dude who doesn't have the experiences of going out and was not living a normal person's life during that time. So I think, like, he nails Zoom funerals really well, which is really interesting, and deals with that. Because I would imagine he probably had to attend a few. Like, that I believe, because he's, like, an older dude, so I'm sure he had people in his life who died of COVID. But, like, I don't think he was, like, going to the corner store during COVID. You know what I mean? Like, all of these things that, like, another author might have been able to write it a little bit more naturally and a little bit more, like, smoothly and made it work a little bit better. Whereas, like, this, it's kind of just a little bit out of place because, like, it's not well integrated into all aspects of the story. He also tries to tackle some... There is a character who's, like, a young black woman and trying to find her way through, like, the publishing world and her, like, opinions on art and everything like that. I don't think King is equipped to actually do a believable version of that character either. One, she's super young. Two, she's a person of color, and that's one of King's faults always. He's very, very bad at doing that. Like, he cannot not do some type of dialect, which literally, and get out, like, a bunch of, like, horrible slurs, which, by the way, there was, like, last minute, like, in, like, the last 10 pages, there was definitely a diatribe of somebody, and I'm like, Couldn't get through a whole book without doing it, could you, King? I give all of those prefaces because I actually quite liked Holly. As you can see, it's pretty high up on this list. And I liked Holly. I think Holly is not perfect. There's a lot of issues with Holly, but I do think it gets the character of Holly Gibney super well. And also, I think there's a lot of interesting things about aging. And all of that stuff is really interesting and seems to almost be like a direct reflection of King talking shit on his own past views in a way that's like talking about how like, you live through all these social changes, and if you still believe the shitty things you believed back then, that's your fault. And that, you know what I mean? Like, you try to justify it however you want. But anyways, I think he was kind of trying to talk about his own views and his own perspectives. And I really like the main villains in this story. I like that quite a bit. I think it's probably thriller more than horror, but it's on the cusp. There's some things where if another author had wrote it, it would probably be super scary, but King just doesn't really go full horror much anymore, so it was kind of felt more like thrillery. I still enjoyed it. I thought it was a good story. It really gets you paranoid about Dimension. Just beware, because so many... Every time I mess up a word, I'm like, uh-oh. And then looking up the warning signs. Anyways, that's that. A good book, but not a perfect book. Next up, Dread vs. Death. This is a Judge Dredd video game adaptation. Sorry, Steven. Can't beat all Judge Dredd versus Death. I've never played this video game. I didn't even know this video game existed until I found out that there was a novelization of it, and then I had to look up and watch a few videos on the game. This is just a very fun Judge Dredd story that gets the fact that Judge Dredd is a satire about over-policing and a horrible unjust system at work and how it plays into a society and stuff like that. So I just had a good time with this. It's kind of like an adventure of Judge Dredd fighting all these interdimensional evil judges, and I'm like, that's fun. It's just a fun story. It's got a lot of fun little references, and it's just from start to finish a fun read. That's what I'd say. Just a fun read. An enjoyable read. You don't have to play the video game. I didn't. So, I was never, lost. And the only thing that I think that is funny that you do consistently kind of see in video game adaptations is the writer being like, it's fucking insane that this character has done all of these things in a day. So in later chapters, they have to write about how exhausted they are and have to try to deal with what the toll would be on the human body from doing all these things. Where it's in a video game, it's day 1 you're fighting a zombie, and then day 2 you're fighting Dracula. By the way, there's both zombies and a Draculas in here. They're vampires, but not Draculas. But you get it. You get it. And I just had super fun with this. Just a quick, fun, silly read. Next up, Age of Darkness, a Horus Heresy short story collection. I think that this is one of the best short story collections in the entire Horus Heresy series. The only story that kind of brings it down slightly is the first story, as it's kind of just meh. The first story is meh. All the others are quite good and quite varied in terms of their content and how they are implemented. So if you're going through the Horus Heresy series, I would definitely recommend this one. Next up, Godzilla and Godzilla Raids Again. This is a novelization and a translation of 2 novellas. So novelizations? I don't know if you call novelizations novelizations if they were novellas, but it doesn't flow off the tongue very well. But this is 2 novellas put together in one book, and it is really interesting to read. It was just translated, but these were both written in the 50s back to coincide with the first Godzilla and Godzilla Raids Again. Both of them are really fun, quick reads. I do actually think that Godzilla Raids Again is better on the written page because the Godzilla novelization does change a lot, but it does also get into some of the more heady, important aspects to the film version of Godzilla. And I think that original Godzilla movie, it's the problem with novelizing it is that the entire appeal of Godzilla as a character is really all about the filmmaking process, because it comes down to effects work, it comes down to direction, it comes down to music as well. Like, music is a big part of it. Sound effects, acting. There's some really great performance in that. It's like Godzilla is really emblematic of the collaborative nature of film and how it can really, really change a property. It's fun to read as a novella form, and the afterword is pretty essential because it will make you think about the choices being made when people translate works of media. So I think that's really important. Next up, Awakenings by George Mann. This is a Warhammer novel about the Inquisitor after Sabathiel. She is she's a bad person. She's not a good person because she's an Inquisitor. Inquisitors are, bad people because it's in the name. Inquisitors. No Inquisitor throughout history has ever been good. And this is just like, now there's Inquisitors in space. And she works for the arm of the Inquisition, which is called the Order Hereticus. And what they do is, anytime anyone's being heretical or like going against the teachings of the God Emperor, she kills them. It doesn't matter if they're a chaos cult or just a guy going, I don't really like the Emperor. Inquisitor shows up, kachangla, you're dead. So this is a story about her and her retinue of other bastards trying to solve a pretty fun mystery at the core. I really like the characters in this, and I think that there's like an awesome exploration of finding the human in the inhuman that I really, really enjoy about this tale. It's really, really fun to read, especially when you go in with the knowledge that these are not good people, and it's an interesting story to see how these not good people solve a problem that, when you think about it, the problem only exists because of the corrupt institutions that they upheld. So the main problem and the main mystery in this is something that legitimately only happens because of the system that our heroes are protecting, which I think is really interesting, and I liked it a lot. This is written by George Mann, who also had this character appear in a comic book series before this, and the comic book series I didn't like. You don't need to read the comic book series. It's all summed up really well and established really well what you need to know about that series when this book starts. And it's actually better that you don't read the comic book series because this comic book series is just meh. I just think Warhammer as a series works much better in the written word. There's also some amazing action sequences in this, which I think really heighten the material. Some of my favorite action sequences I have read this year, so really, really recommend this one. Next up is Edenville. This was Amy from Amy Noel Reads book club pick. It's a weird book about a lot of weird things, and no one has time for me to get on to all the ins and outs. I enjoyed the ins and outs of the weirdness. I thought that there were some really cool ideas in this. I would like to reread it again, but I would probably prefer to read it physically, as I think the audio narration makes certain characters not sound different enough that you can get easily confused, especially near the end because there are so many characters in it. But the wildness that you can find in this is well worth it. I would just recommend go in knowing it's weird and just enjoy the ride. I don't want to talk too much about this one. Next up, Horus Heresy, Slaves to Darkness. This is the Horus Heresy novel that is like all of the villains meeting up before they go to do the Siege of Terra, which is the final series. And it's them all getting together in one place, and it's a whole bunch of petty demons arguing the entire book. And it's amazing. It's amazing. All of the character writing in this I love so much. I love all of these like ins and outs of these like petty ass demons having arguments over these like giant cosmic scale events. And there's so much good stuff in here. Lots of great cosmic horror. Lots of amazing character writing and character work. And I had a blast with this one. One of my favorite Horus Heresy novels. It's so much fun. Next up is an arc that I read, which is Do or Die, a Zombicide novel. This was just a really good zombie tale. That was apparently the third in the series. I didn't read the other two. I want to go back and read those two, but I felt like I still understood where the characters are at emotionally and all the ins and outs of their characters without doing that past work. This was really fun. There's a luchador who fights a giant turtle. Don't know what else you could possibly want from a book. Next up, Rites of Passage by Mike Brooks. This is another Warhammer novel. I know, there were quite a bit. This is actually the final one, so breathe, breathe, breathe. So I thought this is just a blast. This was super fun, super interesting. It was told from a perspective you don't really see a lot in Warhammer. It's told from a really unique viewpoint. Mike Brooks is like hard left-wing person, so like he understands that like the Imperium is bad and makes its own problems, and that is also very much on display here. Really, really great characters, really fun story to read, and understands that almost every single character in this is a bastard. Next up is The Salt Grows Heavy by Cassandra Khaw. This is kind of a short book, but I quite enjoyed this. This is a novella. I like Cassandra Khaw. I liked Nothing But Blacking Teeth. I know I'm in the minority there. I thought that was a fun story to read. This is much, much different than that. And this is a little bit more kind of like heady. And it's short, but you really have to pay attention because it is a lot of stuff going on and a lot of stuff that's not directly said and like hinted at. And it's a very strange book about a mermaid who has been forced to give up the sea by her horrible husband who is dead, and her and a plague doctor going on travels, and it's weird. In a month where I read some really weird books, this was probably the weirdest, but I really, really enjoyed it. Next up is Alien, the Illustrated Story. This is a comic book adaptation by Archie Goodwin and Walt Simonson that was released in the 70s to coincide with the very first Alien movie. This was awesome. One of the best comic book adaptations I've ever read. And it really kind of captures the style of the story, adds a little bit, adds some stuff from deleted scenes, has some really interesting abstract artwork that can really add to you getting into the shoes and the feelings of certain characters. And yeah, one of the best adaptations of a movie to a comic book form that I've ever read. So our Alien the Illustrated Story, fantastic. Next up is Out There Screaming, an anthology of new black horror. This is a horror anthology, who would have thought, that is all focusing on black authors and their perspectives, and it was awesome. There were so many interesting stories in here, so many unique perspectives and ideas. It was so diverse in the time periods and the themes, and to really give this book its full credit, I would have to do a very in-depth review on this. So all I will say is this is an excellent book. There is so much going on in this, so many great short story collections, so many great short stories, and a lot of authors that I'm going to have to check out because, yeah, I absolutely love this. So highest recommend. One of the best short story collections I've read in a very long time. And last, but certainly not least, my favorite book of the month, Alien the Cold Forge by Alex White. I have talked about this book many, many times, so I just reread it. This is the third time I've read this book. I absolutely adore it. It is outstanding and is everything I want from an Alien book and everything I want from a novel. So thank you for watching. I would love to know what you guys read this month, and have yourself a great day. Goodbye.